Staff Sergeant Maria Rodriguez wiped the grease from her hands as she finished working under the hood of another broken Humvee. The Afghanistan sun beat down mercilessly on the forward operating base, and sweat mixed with engine oil dripped from her forehead. Around her, the motor pool buzzed with activity as soldiers prepared vehicles for the next convoy mission. Maria had been fixing engines and maintaining military vehicles for 8 years. She joined the Army right after high school, choosing the mechanical field because she had always been good with her hands. Growing up in a small Texas town, she spent weekends in her father's garage, learning to rebuild transmissions and diagnose engine problems. The other soldiers often joked that she could make any broken machine run again with just a wrench and determination. But Maria carried a secret that most people on the base didn't know about. Before becoming a mechanic, she had completed intensive combat training. She qualified as an expert marksman with multiple weapons systems. She had trained in close-quarters combat, tactical movement, and battlefield strategy. However, when she arrived at the base 6 months ago, the commanding officers only saw her mechanical skills on paper. They needed someone to keep the vehicles running, and Maria's combat abilities were quickly forgotten. The other soldiers treated her with respect, but they saw her as support staff. She worked in coveralls, not combat gear. Her days were spent in the motor pool, not on patrol. When dangerous missions came up, the commanders always chose the infantrymen and the special operations teams. Maria understood her role, but sometimes she felt frustrated watching others head out on missions while she stayed behind turning wrenches. On this particular morning, something felt different on the base. Maria noticed increased radio chatter and more meetings between the officers. She could sense tension in the air, the kind that usually meant a big operation was being planned. As she worked on a truck's transmission, Lieutenant Colonel Matthews walked into the motor pool with a serious expression. "Rodriguez, I need you to prep 3 vehicles for a special mission. These need to be perfect. No mechanical failures allowed," he said, handing her a work order. Maria looked at the paperwork and saw it was for a SEAL team operation. The Navy SEALs had arrived at the base 2 weeks earlier for a classified mission. She had seen them training and preparing, but like everyone else who wasn't directly involved, she didn't know the details of their assignment. "When do they need them, sir?" Maria asked, already mentally calculating the work required. "Tomorrow morning, 0500 hours. The SEALs are hitting a high-value target about 40 miles north of here. Intelligence says it's a compound where enemy commanders are planning major attacks against our forces," Matthews explained. As Maria worked on the vehicles that afternoon, she overheard fragments of conversation between the SEAL team members. They were discussing entry points, extraction routes, and contingency plans. The mission sounded dangerous and complex. The target was in hostile territory, surrounded by enemy fighters who had been preparing for an attack. That evening, Maria finished her work on the last vehicle and performed final inspections. Everything was running perfectly. The engines purred smoothly, the transmissions shifted without hesitation, and all systems showed green on the diagnostic equipment. She felt proud knowing that her mechanical expertise was contributing to the success of an important mission. As she cleaned her tools and prepared to head to the mess hall for dinner, she overheard a radio transmission that made her blood run cold. Intelligence had updated the threat assessment for the SEAL mission. Enemy forces in the area were larger than originally estimated. The compound was more heavily defended than expected. Despite this new information, the mission was still going forward as planned. Maria felt a knot forming in her stomach. She knew the SEALs were highly trained and capable, but something about this mission worried her. Maybe it was intuition, or maybe it was the way the intelligence officers kept revising their reports. Whatever it was, she couldn't shake the feeling that something was going to go wrong. That night, Maria couldn't sleep. She lay in her bunk listening to the sounds of the base, generators humming, guards walking their posts, the distant sound of helicopters. She thought about the SEAL team members she had met. They seemed confident and professional, but they were still human beings heading into a dangerous situation. She got up and walked to the motor pool, telling herself she just wanted to do one more check on the vehicles. As she inspected each truck again, she noticed something she had missed earlier. One of the spare tire mounts was loose. It wasn't dangerous, but it could cause problems if the team needed to change a tire quickly under fire. She spent 20 minutes tightening the bolts and making sure everything was secure. As dawn approached, Maria watched the SEAL team load their gear into the vehicles she had prepared. They moved with practiced efficiency, checking weapons, communication equipment, and supplies. The team leader, a calm-faced operator everyone called Chief, nodded to her as he performed his own vehicle inspection. "Good work on these trucks, Rodriguez. They sound like they're ready for anything," he said. "They'll get you there and back, Chief. I guarantee it," Maria replied, though she still felt that nagging worry in her chest. At exactly 0500 hours, the three vehicles rolled out of the base gates, disappearing into the early morning darkness. Maria stood watching until their taillights vanished, then returned to her daily routine of maintenance and repairs. But throughout the morning, she found herself frequently glancing at the radio, waiting for updates on the mission status. Around noon, the first reports started coming back. The SEAL team had reached the target area and was beginning their approach to the compound. Everything was proceeding according to plan. Maria felt some of her worry begin to ease. Maybe her intuition had been wrong this time. But that feeling of relief didn't last long. 2 hours later, urgent radio transmissions began crackling across the base communication systems. The SEAL team was in trouble. They had successfully infiltrated the compound and captured their high-value target, but enemy reinforcements had arrived faster than expected. The team was now surrounded and pinned down, taking heavy fire from multiple directions. Maria's heart started racing as she listened to the fragmentary reports. The SEALs were outnumbered and running low on ammunition. Their extraction route had been cut off. Enemy fighters were closing in from all sides, and the situation was deteriorating rapidly. The base commander immediately began organizing a rescue operation, but it would take time to mobilize sufficient forces and equipment. Helicopter support was at least an hour away due to weather conditions and the distance to the target area. Ground reinforcements would take even longer to reach the trapped SEAL team. As Maria listened to the increasingly desperate radio calls from the compound, she realized something that made her blood turn cold. The SEAL team's position was only about 15 miles from where she stood. With the right vehicle and the right route, someone could potentially reach them much faster than any organized rescue operation. She looked at the vehicles in the motor pool, and her mind began racing through possibilities. There was a heavy-duty truck she had just finished overhauling, equipped with armor plating and mounted weapons systems. The route to the compound would be dangerous, but it was possible. The question was whether anyone would authorize such a risky mission, and whether she would be allowed to participate even if they did. But as another urgent transmission crackled over the radio, reporting that the SEALs were taking casualties and their situation was becoming critical, Maria realized that waiting for authorization might mean waiting too long. Sometimes, she thought to herself, you have to stop being just a mechanic and remember that you're also a soldier. Maria's hands moved with practiced speed as she geared up for what she knew would be the most important mission of her life. She had made her decision in the motor pool while listening to the desperate radio calls from the trapped SEAL team. Official rescue operations were still being organized, but the SEALs didn't have time to wait. Every minute that passed meant more enemy fighters converging on their position. She grabbed her combat gear from her locker, equipment she hadn't worn since arriving at the base. Her body armor, helmet, and tactical vest felt familiar despite months of wearing coveralls instead. She checked her M4 rifle and loaded extra magazines, her hands moving automatically through procedures she had drilled countless times during training. The muscle memory was still there, even after months of focusing on engines instead of firefights. The armored truck she chose was a beast of a machine, designed to withstand enemy fire while carrying heavy weapons. She had personally rebuilt its engine 2 weeks earlier and knew every bolt and component. The mounted machine gun system was fully operational, and the armor plating would provide protection against small arms fire. Most importantly, this truck was fast enough to reach the SEAL team's position before organized reinforcements could arrive. Maria knew she was violating protocol by taking unauthorized action, but she also knew that following proper channels would take too long. She quickly scribbled a note explaining her intentions and left it on Lieutenant Colonel Matthews' desk. If she survived this mission, she would face the consequences later. If she didn't survive, at least her commanding officer would understand why she had made this choice. The base perimeter guards recognized Maria and the truck, so they raised the gates without question when she approached. They assumed she was responding to official orders to support the rescue operation. She didn't correct their assumption. Sometimes, she reflected, it was better to ask for forgiveness than permission. Once outside the base, Maria followed the route she had memorized from studying maps of the region. The terrain was rough and dangerous, with rocky hills and narrow valleys where enemy fighters could easily set up ambushes. But she also knew this route would get her to the compound faster than the main roads that official rescue teams would have to use. As she drove through the hostile landscape, Maria monitored the radio communications between the trapped SEAL team and base operations. The situation was getting worse by the minute. The SEALs had managed to secure their high-value target, but enemy reinforcements were arriving in waves. They were now completely surrounded and running dangerously low on ammunition. Chief's voice crackled over the radio, trying to maintain calm professionalism despite the desperate circumstances. "Base, we're taking heavy fire from all directions. Request immediate support. We've got wounded and can't maintain this position much longer." The response from base operations was frustrating but predictable. "Copy that, Chief. Air support is en route, but weather conditions are delaying arrival. Ground reinforcements are mobilizing but won't reach you for at least 90 minutes. Maria pressed the accelerator harder, pushing the truck to its maximum safe speed across the rough terrain. 90 minutes was too long. The SEALs would be overrun long before official help arrived. She was their best hope, and possibly their only hope. About halfway to the compound, Maria encountered her first enemy fighters. 3 vehicles appeared on a ridge overlooking her route, and she immediately recognized them as enemy scouts moving to reinforce the siege of the SEAL position. They spotted her truck and began descending toward the road, trying to intercept her before she could reach the compound. Maria's combat training kicked in automatically. She had trained for situations exactly like this, where quick thinking and accurate shooting made the difference between life and death. She pulled the truck to a defensive position behind some large rocks and prepared to engage the enemy fighters. The first enemy vehicle came around the rocks with its gun blazing, but Maria was ready. She had positioned the truck perfectly to use its mounted machine gun. Her first burst of fire disabled their engine, and her second burst eliminated the threat entirely. The other 2 vehicles tried to flank her position, but Maria used the truck's mobility to stay ahead of them. This was nothing like working on engines in the motor pool. Every decision had to be made in seconds, and every mistake could be fatal. But Maria found that her training had prepared her well for this moment. Her hands were steady, her mind was clear, and her shooting was accurate. After a brief but intense firefight, all 3 enemy vehicles were neutralized. Maria quickly checked her truck for damage and found only minor scratches on the armor plating. The engine was running perfectly, and all weapons systems remained operational. She had passed her first test, but she knew the real challenge was still ahead. As she got closer to the compound, the sounds of battle became louder and more intense. She could hear automatic weapons fire, explosions, and the distinctive crack of sniper rifles. The radio chatter from the SEAL team was becoming more urgent and desperate. They were down to their last magazines of ammunition, and had several wounded team members who needed medical attention. Maria studied the compound through binoculars from a concealed position about a mile away. The situation was worse than she had imagined. The SEAL team was trapped in a building at the center of the compound, completely surrounded by enemy fighters. There had to be at least 40 enemy combatants positioned around the building, with more arriving every few minutes. The enemy had set up machine gun positions covering all the approaches to the building where the SEALs were trapped. They had also positioned snipers on the rooftops of surrounding structures, making it nearly impossible for the SEALs to move or fight back effectively. It was a tactical nightmare that would challenge even the most experienced military units. But Maria noticed something that the enemy fighters had overlooked. There was a drainage ditch that ran along the eastern side of the compound, partially hidden by debris and abandoned equipment. If she could get her truck to that position without being detected, she might be able to create enough confusion and destruction to give the SEALs a fighting chance. The plan that formed in her mind was dangerous and probably suicidal, but it was the only option she could see. She would use the truck's speed and armor to punch through the enemy's defensive line, drawing their attention away from the trapped SEAL team. Once she was in the compound, she would use the truck's weapons to eliminate as many enemy fighters as possible while giving the SEALs an opportunity to break out of their surrounded position. Maria checked her weapons one final time and said a quick prayer. She thought about her family back in Texas and hoped they would understand why she had made this choice. Then she started the engine and began moving toward the compound, staying low and using available cover to avoid detection for as long as possible. The truck's engine purred quietly as she approached the drainage ditch. Everything depended on the next few minutes. Either she would succeed in rescuing the SEAL team, or she would die trying. But failure wasn't an option she was willing to consider. Somewhere in that compound, brave soldiers were counting on help that wasn't coming fast enough through official channels. Maria had spent her entire military career being underestimated because she worked with tools instead of weapons. People saw her as support personnel, not a combat soldier. Today, she was going to show everyone what a determined mechanic could accomplish when the stakes were high enough and the cause was just. As she reached the edge of the compound, Maria took a deep breath and prepared to announce her arrival to the enemy fighters in the most dramatic way possible. Maria floored the accelerator and burst through the compound's perimeter like a thunderbolt. The armored truck smashed through the makeshift barriers and immediately drew the attention of every enemy fighter in the area. Gunfire erupted from multiple directions as the enemy realized they were under attack from an unexpected direction. The truck's armor plating deflected most of the incoming fire, but Maria could hear bullets pinging off the metal around her. She ignored the noise and focused on her mission. The mounted machine gun roared to life as she began systematically eliminating enemy positions. Her first target was a machine gun nest that had been pouring fire into the building where the SEALs were trapped. Years of training and natural shooting ability combined with determination forged by desperation. Maria's accuracy was devastating. Each burst from her weapon found its target, and enemy fighters began falling with precision that shocked their comrades. She had trained for scenarios like this, but training was nothing compared to the real thing. Lives depended on every shot she fired. The truck roared through the compound as Maria engaged multiple targets simultaneously. Enemy fighters scattered in confusion, unable to coordinate their response to this unexpected assault. Many of them had been focused entirely on the surrounded SEAL team and were caught completely off guard by Maria's sudden appearance. Within the first 2 minutes of her attack, Maria had eliminated 8 enemy combatants and destroyed 2 of their heavy weapon positions. The pressure on the trapped SEAL team immediately decreased as enemy fighters turned their attention toward this new threat. Chief's voice crackled over the radio with surprise and hope. "Unknown friendly, this is SEAL Team Alpha. Identify yourself and your intentions," came the transmission. Maria grabbed her radio while continuing to maneuver the truck and engage targets. "This is Staff Sergeant Rodriguez from Base Echo. I'm here to get you out of this mess, Chief." There was a moment of silence over the radio. Then Chief's voice came back with what sounded like amazement mixed with relief. "Rodriguez? The mechanic? How did you get here so fast?" "I'll explain later. Right now, I need you to be ready to move when I give the signal," Maria replied, then immediately returned her attention to the battle raging around her. The enemy fighters had recovered from their initial shock and were now coordinating their efforts to stop her truck. They concentrated their fire on the vehicle while trying to surround her position. But Maria had anticipated this response and was already moving to her next objective. She drove the truck directly toward the largest concentration of enemy fighters, using speed and surprise to minimize her exposure to their weapons. As she approached their position, she prepared the truck's secondary weapons systems. The vehicle was equipped with smoke grenades and explosive devices that could clear large areas of enemy personnel. The smoke grenades detonated perfectly, creating a thick cloud that obscured the enemy's vision while providing cover for Maria's next move. She used this concealment to reposition the truck and launch her assault on the enemy's command position. Intelligence had indicated that enemy leaders were coordinating the siege from a building on the compound's western side. Maria's attack on the command post was swift and decisive. She eliminated the enemy leaders and destroyed their communication equipment, throwing their forces into chaos. Without coordination from their commanders, the enemy fighters began making tactical mistakes and exposing themselves to her weapons. As the battle continued, Maria demonstrated tactical skills that amazed even the experienced SEAL team members who were monitoring her progress. She used the compound's layout to her advantage, employing cover and concealment while maintaining mobility. Her mechanical knowledge of the truck's capabilities allowed her to push the vehicle beyond its normal operational limits. The tide of battle was turning, but Maria knew she couldn't maintain this pace indefinitely. The truck was taking damage from enemy fire, and she was running low on ammunition for the heavy weapons. More importantly, enemy reinforcements would probably arrive soon, and she needed to extract the SEAL team before that happened. "Chief, I'm going to create an opening on the north side of your building. When you see my signal, move fast toward the extraction point," Maria transmitted. She maneuvered the truck into position and unleashed everything she had left at the enemy fighters, covering the north approach to the SEAL position. Explosive rounds cleared the immediate area, while machine gun fire suppressed any remaining threats. Within moments, she had created a corridor of relative safety. "Go now!" Maria shouted into the radio. The SEAL team moved with the speed and precision that made them legendary. They carried their wounded comrades and their high-value prisoner while laying down covering fire to protect their movement. Maria provided overwatch with the truck's weapons, eliminating any enemy fighters who tried to interfere with the extraction. But as the SEALs reached the truck's position, Maria realized they had a problem. The vehicle wasn't large enough to carry the entire team, plus their prisoner and wounded personnel. Someone would have to stay behind or find another way out of the compound. "Chief, take your team and get out of here. I'll find another route," Maria said, preparing to leave the truck and continue fighting on foot. "Negative, Rodriguez. We don't leave anyone behind. Ever," Chief replied firmly. That's when Maria noticed something that changed everything. During her assault on the compound, she had damaged several enemy vehicles, but not destroyed them completely. One of those vehicles was a large transport truck that could carry the entire team. It was risky, but it might be their best option for everyone to escape together. "Chief, see that enemy transport truck about 50 meters to your east? If I can get it running, we can all get out of here," Maria explained her plan. The SEAL team provided covering fire while Maria sprinted across open ground toward the damaged enemy vehicle. Bullets kicked up dust around her feet as she ran, but she reached the truck safely. Years of mechanical training paid off as she quickly diagnosed the damage and identified what repairs were needed. Working under fire with enemy combatants trying to stop her, Maria performed what might have been the fastest mechanical repair in military history. She bypassed damaged electrical systems, jury-rigged the fuel line, and got the engine running in less than 3 minutes. The truck lurched to life just as enemy fighters closed in on her position. Maria drove the repaired truck directly toward the SEAL team's position, using it as a shield against enemy fire. The SEALs piled into the vehicle with their wounded and their prisoner, while Maria kept the engine running and planned their escape route. As they prepared to leave the compound, Maria counted the enemy casualties from her solo assault. She had eliminated 40 enemy combatants and destroyed most of their heavy equipment. What had started as a rescue mission had become a devastating defeat for the enemy forces. The extraction from the compound was harrowing but successful. Maria drove through enemy fire while the SEALs provided covering fire from the truck's cargo area. They fought their way clear of the immediate danger zone and began the journey back toward friendly territory. During the drive back to base, Chief approached Maria with an expression of deep respect and gratitude. "Rodriguez, what you did back there was incredible. You saved our entire team and completed our mission. Where did you learn to fight like that?" Maria smiled tiredly as she focused on navigating the rough terrain. "I've been a soldier longer than I've been a mechanic, Chief. People just forgot that because I'm good with engines." When they finally reached the base, Maria faced the consequences of her unauthorized mission. Lieutenant Colonel Matthews was waiting with a mixture of anger and admiration. She had violated direct orders and taken enormous risks, but she had also saved the lives of an entire SEAL team and ensured the success of a critical mission. The investigation that followed revealed the full scope of Maria's actions and the tactical brilliance she had demonstrated during the rescue operation. Military analysts studied her assault on the compound and concluded that her improvised tactics had been more effective than most planned operations with much larger forces. Maria Rodriguez returned to working on engines in the motor pool, but everything had changed. No one on the base would ever again see her as just a mechanic. She had proven that courage and skill could overcome any obstacles when the cause was important enough. The SEAL team she rescued never forgot what she had done for them. Chief personally recommended her for the Silver Star, citing her extraordinary heroism and tactical excellence under fire. The citation read, "Staff Sergeant Rodriguez demonstrated exceptional courage and military skill in conducting a solo rescue operation that saved the lives of 8 fellow service members and ensured the success of a critical mission." Years later, when people asked Maria about that day in Afghanistan, she would always say the same thing. "I was just a soldier doing my job. It didn't matter whether my tools were wrenches or weapons. When my fellow soldiers needed help, everything else was just details." But everyone who knew the full story understood that what Maria Rodriguez accomplished that day was far more than just doing her job. She had single-handedly defeated a force 10 times her size and rescued an elite military unit that had been given up for lost. She had proven that heroism comes in many forms, and sometimes the most unlikely people become the most extraordinary heroes when circumstances demand it.